Hi, I'm Dr. Bob Thomas. I'm a professor in the School of Communication Design at Loyola. I direct the Center for Environmental Communication, and I teach in the environmental program in the biology department. So I wear many hats. And one of the hats that I wear is that I teach in my classes, like the ecology of the Delta, about hurricanes and about how they form, what they do, how they damage our coast. So I understand hurricanes, and when they come, I leave. We were on the west side of the storm, which means that's the weaker side of the storm. To be honest, everybody thought it would go through and be gone. But nonetheless, just to be safe, my family left. We went near Lafayette and kind of hunkered down. The next morning, I was listening to the WWL. People were calling in and saying what was happening in their neighborhoods and how it was affecting them and what their fears were and what their concerns were. Everybody wanted to come home, but everybody knew you couldn't come home. We couldn't even get in the city. We'd be turned away at the edge. Well, about a week later, they allowed us to come back. You had to come in after sunrise and leave before dark. I live in Metairie, and we did not flood where I lived. And so my son and son-in-law and I came over, and we did some cleaning up and straightening up of the yard and all that kind of thing, and then we left. The next morning, one of my daughters said, "Dad, I think there's electricity in your house." And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I called the number and the answer machine picked up." So a few days later, we came back and we walked in. My wife and I walked in the house. We walked in the middle of the room. Lights were on. A fan was on. We had full electricity. And we both teared up because we realized what was happening in our community. And oh my gosh, our house is functional again. So within a week or so, we were able to come back home. And so I got the word out real fast to people that our house was available. I'm sure other people were doing it as well. But all of a sudden, people started knocking on our doors saying, could I come in and take a bath? I've been in this muck for several days. And of course, we said yes, yes, yes. And we cooked and we cooked and we cooked. And we washed clothes and we washed clothes and did everything that we could do because that's what people do under these circumstances. So then time passed. The city opened up again where you could drive in. I came back to Loyola, checked on everything, and was coming in every day and doing what I could do. But then I started leading tours because we decided that we needed to take parents around to show them the damage and to show them what really happened here, to tell the story. And our students, same thing. So I said, well, I can lead a tour. And so the university organized for buses to come in. We had a big sign on the side of our bus and on the front windows that said Loyola University Katrina Tours, because there was a lot of angst with people thinking that commercial people were cashing in on their trauma. And so we put Loyola on ours, and we never had a problem. They understood that we were a local university that they knew well and that we were doing something for the good of the community. I did about 200 tours. I mean, that was really an experience. And the way I put it together was that we left here and we went to Metairie, and we drove down Veterans toward the city. And as you drove through Metairie, people were going in and out of stores, hardware stores. People were doing what they have to do to get back to life. And as soon as we crossed the 17th Street Canal, nothing. There were no people, there were no stores open, no restaurants, no nothing. We hardly saw anybody. We'd spend 2 hours in the city. It was a tour that showed people exactly what happened and how the damage occurred. There were houses just gone. And I remember when we got into the lower 9, we started seeing people. There weren't many people, but there were people. And we would stop sometime and I would get off and just introduce myself and ask them what they were doing. And they all said, "We're just trying to see the trauma that occurred in New Orleans." Lower 9 was sort of an epicenter for that, even though there was flooding everywhere. All classes of people in the city were traumatized by what happened. It was a real learning experience for us. And then there was the other side of it, the personal side. I remember having pancakes at Betsy's one morning. Several of us were talking about what was going on, and a lady was sitting next to us, and she came over to our table and said, "I hear y'all talking about Katrina." And she says, and so she shared her story for 30 minutes. And we sat there listening to every word and asking her questions, because that's what we did back then. I mean, people don't realize that, but all of a sudden, everybody wanted to know everybody else's story and how it affected them and how we could recommend that people get engaged or our engagement could help them. And so it really went that way for a very long time. And then it gradually, things started to get back to normal quote unquote. Do we ever get to normal in New Orleans? You always fear hurricane season, and you worry about other people. I mean, remember what was happening at the Superdome and at the convention center? That was on national news constantly, and there was really good reporting, and there was really some bad reporting that happened for that, where people were being misled about what was really going on here. But people were stressed. People were in turmoil. People were very concerned. There was so much uncertainty, and nobody really knew what the future held and how we would go forward. Everything was different, and everybody had to adapt to it, but mainly we had internal concerns, and we knew we wanted to rebuild this city. And every time we heard somebody make a comment about maybe we shouldn't rebuild New Orleans because it's prone to hurricanes, and here we're one of the largest ports in America, in the world. And I remember one time saying to someone that brought that up, I said, maybe you're right. Maybe that's something we need to think about. Maybe we should put the Port of New Orleans, the largest port in America, in Denver, because then it would never get hit by a hurricane. And I just paused, and the person looked at me like, should I be mad at him for saying that or not? But people were making these proposals about not rebuilding New Orleans, abandoning New Orleans, and that didn't play. We know this city. We know its heart. We know its culture. We know its value to America. New Orleanians are resilient and tough, and everybody wanted to be here. Everybody wanted to come home, and eventually, and people are still coming home, by the way, from 20 years ago. One of the neat things about New Orleans is the love that people that live here have for it, and the love that people that routinely come here to visit, because they love everything about the culture and the food and the ambiance of the city and its history and that sort of thing. One of the things that came out of Katrina, I think, for us was that we sort of revalidated that. At first, there was all the uncertainty, but then the revalidation began, where people said, oh no, we're going to survive this. We're going to do well. This is going to make a better city. This is going to make us stronger. We had these great fears like the Saints are going to leave. It was funny, the things that we talked about, not humorous, but funny in retrospect. But New Orleans is one of those cities that I always jokingly say, you either love it or you don't like it. The reality is that there's almost nobody ambivalent about this city. But that's part of its charm, I think, is that people have such strong emotions about it. And so the people that came back were ready to rebuild this city, and they would do anything they could to rebuild. One of the gifts that we got from Katrina, it's hard to imagine that we got any gifts, but one of the gifts we got was a community coming back together. People were reaching out to people that they had never worked with before and realizing that we will only gain strength with unity, with everybody collaborating to make this a better place. That sense of spirit lives today. It's still very strong. Some of us are lucky in that our neighborhoods didn't flood, but we were all very concerned about the well-being of the people who suffered horribly in that storm. So I think it gave us a new sense of spirit of belief. And there were neighborhoods like in St. Bernard Parish. They were the epicenter for the flooding that came in through broken levees in the east. One of the numbers that was floating around was that they had 2,700 occupied dwellings in St. Bernard Parish before the storm. And after the storm passed, there was one. So everybody else was wiped out. They were told, you can't come back to St. Bernard Parish for a year to even take a look. And of course, a few months later, they opened it up and people could come back and take a look, but they had to leave that day. People would drive up to their house in a pickup with tools in the back, and they would hug each other, cry a little bit, hug their neighbors, get caught up, and then they pulled the tools out and started working on their houses. When they had to leave, they left, but they were back the next day. So they rebuilt that town before you could even imagine. And that was happening in all the neighborhoods in New Orleans. People were finally coming back home. Some people didn't, but there are people that say, that's it, I found a better way of life. So people were changing their way of life all around from the pressure of the storm. The theme here has been uncertainty during the storm, that nobody knew where this was going, and we didn't know if we were going to be able to to save the city, or the pressures from outside would come in and cause problems. But here we sit 20 years later. If we have another such incident, I think we'll handle it very differently, because we'll have this history within the realm of people who are still alive to share about, here's what happened in Katrina, and we can do better. We can actually become a better community by intermingling our cultural unity and benefiting from knowing one another, working together, trusting one another, and realizing that we all have the same goals for a high quality of life and to maintain the wonder of New Orleans.